The Archetypal Tarot Podcast explores universal human patterns, called archetypes, by investigating the major arcana of the ancient tarot. We recognize these archetypes because they are present in our own life stories, myths, and culture. Each card represents a stage of the journey for understanding the greater story of our lives. What's a song with the sun in it? I saw the sun, lady dee dee. Is that a song?
It probably is. I don't know what you're talking about. Hey, welcome to Teletubby Land! This is, if you haven't guessed it, the Archetypal Tarot Podcast. And we're getting silly for good reason, because we are going to be talking about the Sun card today, which is number 19. And it is all about sun and fun and Sesame Street, pushing the clouds away. We're also going to talk about specifically the child archetype, which is something that resides in all of us. And in case you didn't know, I am Julienne Givot, archetypal consultant, and with me here is Cyndera Quackenbush. So, hey there.
Hello. Sesame Street. This card should just have a big...
Teletubbies. Yeah.
Teletubbies.
La,
And
la, la.
a big bird on it. And I must say, 19. Holy moly.
It's the perfect timing happening here.
I can't believe it.
Just to roll back where we were, you know, we had a little bit of a WTF, lobsters and howling animals and craziness, and it was kind of a drug trip. It was kind of like a, you know, all that unconscious stuff that can be really uncomfortable was rising to the surface, and it was quite a dark ride.
So someone might call that one the bad trip, and this is more like the I'm on mushrooms.
Oh yeah,
out in the field with the sun shining.
Totally.
Not that we would know anything about that.
Well, you know.
No. But yes, let's explore a little bit about what these cards actually look like.
Wonderful symbols. So, as ever, we are going to be looking at the Marseille deck, as well as the Rider Waite. So, if you got those handy, or you want to look them up online.
Yeah, bring them out. And with any of these podcasts, you know, pause the show right now and take a look yourself and get your first impressions. That's always a wonderful
Unless you're in the car listening to this, because, you know, bad idea. Don't stop the car.
Yeah, no meditating on tarot cards while driving. It's not an easy thing to explain.
You know that. So, we digress.
So, starting with the Marseilles, we have our twin children out there playing in what appears to be behind the golden walls, perhaps of those same golden towers we saw in the distance in the moon card. So it's like now we're transported inside this golden, safe, lovely place. And this very anthropomorphic sun is shining overhead.
Kind of cross-eyed. Did you just notice that? The sun looks a little cross-eyed.
It's like a strabismus, you know, in the sun, but very colorful, and I'd say a pretty pleasant, lovely face, raining down multicolored drops onto the children, who appear to be playing half naked outside. It's just it's a very warm and sunny card. And then over here with the Rider Waite, we've lost the twin element, strangely, in this one. I think that there's something important about the twins.
We lost a twin, but we got a horse.
Oh, okay. Well, we got a horse. Well, maybe it's still Gemini, because you know what the Gemini equivalent is to in the Chinese astrology is the horse.
It's a horse. Wow.
So, you know, you're the horse. It's like the year of the Gemini. Just a good warning for you. But yeah, we have a horse. That's a good point. So one of these twins has morphed into a horse. And
sure.
I think I've always wanted to say that. And there's but still a very naked baby. So I'd say maybe some of that nakedness of the stars sort of emerged in this playful, free child on top of the horse. And in the background we have sunflowers, and once again a very big, beaming, anthropomorphic, human-faced sun up in the sky. So let's talk a little bit about these symbols. What sticks out at you, Julienne, as you look at the sun cards? Either of them. What?
I like the Rider Waite one better.
Oh, yeah, I know you always have that bias. I always have the bias for that.
Not always. I don't know, the Marseille deck. I don't know. The kids are awkward. They look like they're just kind of poking each other. They don't look like they're having fun. Where
they're not really
there
smiling.
is something
There is something really sweet
beautiful
about the Rider Waite.
sweet and miraculous. So to picture the Fool is our hero. You know, where we've just come from is this just kind of dark and disturbing place where we're kind of, you know, we're brought almost on these unconscious waters to the next scene, the next stage, if we're looking at this in that linear path. And we welcomed into this gorgeous garden with this kid. He's on a white horse and holding a banner and sunflowers. I mean, this is a happy scene. This is, and many people talk about this in terms of it as a stage, as, you know, we're realizing for the first time as the heroes of this story that we are just beautifully happy. Without particular reason, and I think that's the purview of the child. And the symbols here, I think, have a lot to say about that. The sun itself being a symbol, a very strong symbol of gold in alchemy, and many other cultures also. Like in Egypt, where Sun Ra was personified as the evening sun setting at the end of the creative process, and that has a lot to do with what we're kind of talking about, the creative journey that we've been on. And the alchemists, to kind of go back to that, they understood that the process of creation and utilized the heat of the sun and the idea of the sun philosophically and literally, that like it warms all of us. We'd be dead without the sun, and so it's this great symbol of life. And the child also knew life. You know, we'll go into the archetype of that, and the sunflowers, which really for me are one of my favorite flowers. I don't know if you've ever seen them in the wild. Sunflowers, they're in cities too. But the sunflower is a gorgeous symbol of always turning towards that sun. And you know, if the first thing in the morning, all the sunflowers, which have a very, very heavy sort of head, essentially that flower part on the top is very heavy, and when before the sun comes up, they're drooping and they're facing down, but as the sun comes up, so do the sunflowers come up, and they also move with the sun as the sun goes across the sky. So that, I think there's a lot of rich symbolism here, and in the Rider Waite card with the horse, which has always been a symbol of grace and power and strength, and it's a white horse, so there's this the white horse is also a symbol seen as to do with birth. So it's a lot here, and I mean, I think, you know, yay, finally, after there's something wonderful happening here.
And Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome, are depicted as suckling off wolves, and this is like the birth of them, and they found Rome later on from that. And so it makes me think of that last card, the moon, and how we've come from there to here, and that there was something extremely important about having to transgress or to go through that phase of the moon, and something emerging. We didn't know what it was out of the dark waters of the unconscious, but that by going through that stage and crossing over to this golden kingdom, you know, we've really found a place to emerge in a new way, to be reborn. But it's part of course, of this process of rebirth that we've been talking about on this phase. But I'm also noticing too that both cards have a wall. You know, Rider Waite also has this wall where the sunflowers are behind, and then of course the golden walls in the Marseillaise. There really is a sense of that you've found a safe place. You've been able to create, you know, and I think that's a big lesson for a lot of us to learn, is that yes, we need to learn to be ourselves and all of those cliches you always hear about, but that we also need to know what our boundaries are, and to know this is a safe place to explore. This is a safe person to explore with. So many of the modalities, healing modalities, therapies, and so forth that you find, we're like, okay, this is where the safe wall is, and this person will be a good person to explore this with. Also with relationships and so forth. Finding that wall and being able to put that, you know, but you know, it's not a tall wall. It's not like the tower where we're locking things out, energies out, but it's low enough to be like see over, allow things in, but that you're protected in this space to be naked and free. Woo!
Exactly. And all the fun, and I think really it's sort of like there's a lot of love in the card, just warmth. And you know, when we were talking about in the last podcast about how the moon was its relationship with the priestess card. And you and I were talking earlier, and I was thinking, well, the relationship that just comes to me really quickly of the child and the son here is the parents, you know, the emperor, empress, mother, father cards. And that makes it makes a lot of sense, because there's this, the obvious relationship of mother, father, child, those archetypes. And in our own journey, if we are learning how to be our own best mother and our own best father, that creates that boundary and that structure where that unconditional love can live. And
that's right.
And so we can have sort of a happy vulnerability, which is, you know, it's all the child is this. I mean, this is, you know, a symbolism of innocence and purity and vulnerability. And so if we've embodied that mother-father energy, we create this space where we can just be happy, or we can come upon that happiness and not feel threatened by it, and not feel like we need to, you know, quickly run away from it or encase it, or all those things that we will do, you know, in our lives when we come across this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if I had to spin a story about either of these cards, and this is something I love to do when I work with tarot clients, is that tell a story about this card, these cards together. But if I had to tell a story about this card in general, I would say that the king and queen are quite balanced and happy and in place in this kingdom. There's not a threat from the outside, or doesn't feel like there's sadness in this kingdom right now. That king and queen are so well in place, you don't even have to see them here. It's just trusted that they're in place. So that's wonderful. It's a great sign.
Absolutely. And since there's a sense of fun with this card as well, and the fact that the sun is reaching beyond the limits and the edges of that card, and it is that, like, this is, we are able to experience that sense of fun and love, and it can be a surprise. And that's why I think I like the contrast of coming from the moon, because you're probably not thinking about any of this. And if you're that moon process, that sort of tortured artist thing that we were talking about in the last card, it's such a space that it's hard to imagine what that amazing Teletubby, like fabulous, don't worry about anything, childlike experience is. And this, we're just thrown into it right here. And it's like, what? You know, in the same way that things were odd in the last one, they're happy in this one, and just free.
And what a wonderful lesson that contrast between the cards. Like when you're down in the dumps, when you're having a depressed day, how often is it like, oh my gosh, it's never going to get better. But then you remember all the times that it did get better, and you're like, oh, it's going to get better. And then it does get better.
Yeah, and this
Sun card.
It's so much to me. Exactly, it's about the experiencing of that sense of just joy and happiness and warmth.
Yeah. And which really brings us to the embodiment aspect of this card. That it's really about being we're getting out of the head here, folks. We're getting out of the intellect and all of that head stuff, and we're really able to just be in the body and the enjoyment of that. I think that's a huge thing, to enjoy the pleasures of life, to enjoy the moment. You talked about alchemy earlier, and that there's a phrase in alchemy which is the mind should learn compassionate love for the body. So these are the days where, you know, your planning mind is like, this is a waste of time, but it's totally necessary, whatever it is you need to do, whatever that looks like for you, going to the spa, having a day at the beach, you know, a day that doesn't have any actual use or end product, but that is absolutely necessary for your health and your well-being.
And yeah, I think everybody sort of battles with that, and we are enculturated to think that pleasure is need to be earned. And again, it's that difference between looking at things as being redemption, to redeem yourself, or through an evolution process of inclusion, of including happy and joy and pleasure as a part of your life. I think it's just unfortunate, and I definitely suffer from it too. It's like, oh, can I go do something fun? No, I gotta earn it. You know, I gotta do all these things before I go do it. And then, you know, basically when you can tire yourself out. And you can't connect to this energy as well if you just, want to go and do it because you think you've earned it. That's a different dynamic than just being able to be open to it and say, oh, I will, if these opportunities, and they surely will come upon you, and it's this child archetype that's like the harbinger of that, take it, let it, if that moment of fun comes up, do it, be open to it. Don't fight it. Look for it too. I definitely recommend that. This to me is almost, there's a spontaneity inherent in this. And just today, I just thought of this. A spontaneous moment for myself. I'm on Facebook and just, trolling around, and a friend of mine mentioned something about a game that she plays on the bus, where she imagines what people do, but in a really good way. Oh, this person volunteers with crippled children, and this person does that. I mean, she's just there glancing at people, having so much fun, imagining them as, doing these amazing things in the world. Just for fun, right? And I was like, that's amazing. And I typed in my comment, and I was like, that's great, because I have at times been on the bus just imagining what would this bus be like if we were just all having a big party right now, and everyone's talking to each other, and they're finding out what they have in common. And it's just this, I mean, I will sit there and I will well up with joy just imagining, well, what if that guy over there looks kind of scary? He's hanging out with that older lady, and they're, she's handing him a recipe for this, and there's just this, that's the embodiment of the sun card.
Yeah.
It's just that spontaneous joy.
Oh my God, this is so synchronistic, because, and we didn't even talk about this earlier, audience, but I was, for the first time ever, last night on the bus coming home, I've been kind of playing with drawing again, and not to be like an artist or anything, serious drawing artist or anything, but just to like wake up the right side of the brain. I'm reading Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. Totally recommend it, by the way. But I just thought, I'm just going to draw some people on the bus when they're not suspecting it. And I got my notebook out, and, I'm listening to some music, and suddenly I'm just swept away into just how beautiful this person is that's sitting in front of me, and I'm drawing them. And my bus ride was transformed to that, oh my gosh, I live in the 40s of the avenues, and I gotta come all the way from downtown. And sort of, instead of counting avenues, suddenly I'm transported. I am playing and interacting with reality itself. So play can be anywhere, and it can be any time. It's about a mind frame that you can just
and
get
openness.
into, and an openness to it.
An openness to it.
This is important. But when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that this card, this stage, isn't a reward. You haven't earned this card.
No, I don't
This
think
is
so.
something you can pick up any time. This
Absolutely.
is a state of mind you can be in.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is something about, if we're on the linear path, going from the moon, and what can be so difficult with that by contrast can make this experience richer. But I think it's not totally necessary, and it's not that like, oh, I've been miserable for a year, now I'm going to be happy for a year. I don't know. I think it's more sort of interrelational, and it has to do with, especially in this card, we all have an inner child. And it's just that term is kind of, for me, it's so weighted, it's just got pathology smacked all over it. But, all of us were children. We, no matter what, we're not in the whole cloning thing yet. So all of us are born, we're born, and we do spend some time as children. For some of us, that's a shorter duration or a longer duration. And some of us just haven't grown up. But as a pattern, as an archetype, it's here. And I think that this stage is at the heart of that, and the lightest part of the child, which is that sort of like happiness and joy. Joy for joy's sake. Fun for fun's sake. We hope you're enjoying this episode, and we invite you to become a part of the Archetypal Tarot team by becoming a patron. It's super easy, and there are some awesome rewards for joining. So just visit tiny.cc/tarot for more information. And now back to our program. Yeah.
I must say that this podcast really shifted for me, and when I realized that we were playing together in our, how much fun we could have with this podcast. Like, it didn't have to all be like work and like research, but it's like, it's something, it's like that's the bus moment, it just kind of comes up naturally. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So, your projects. How can you play with your projects? Personal therapies. How many people go into therapy thinking, oh, I'm going to go work on myself now.
Bring my inner child kicking and screaming.
Yeah. I'm going to dig up some dark moon moment roots, But I would say some of the best therapies are with the imagination, with play therapies, sand tray. Look into this, because those aha moments, those realizations, things that actually allow you to grow forward, it's they don't necessarily emerge through some analytic work. That it's really in these freer moments of like just letting the mind go. A Jungian interpretation of this card with the twins is that the ego conscious mind has met within these safe walls an unconscious element. In Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he talks about, there was the me that was the me. It was like personality number one, but then there was this bizarre personality number two. There was something that other people didn't see, and that even I wasn't totally aware of what it was. It seemed like a very ancient self, but also, youthful. And so these two, the unconscious aspect and the conscious ego, are meeting and playing here in safe walls. So what does that look like for you? Is a great question to ask.
Yeah, and if you were to go back to the kind of the picture of the Fool as the hero landing here and interacting with the symbols on the card, meets this child, probably having a good old time playing. And finally, the question that I thought was interesting is the Fool asks the child, "Who are you?" And the child says, "I'm you. I'm the you that's unbound by fear and by doubt, all present within." And that, I think, is the kind of the crux of this card. And how I love the fact that there is a wall here, there is a boundary, and there are these wonderful happy symbols. And at least to the extent of the Rider Waite, the banner that there's a horse, riding in on your horse and being saved by a child. And there's a banner, which I always, associate with that sort of, it's probably more like a Judeo-Christian, I'm here to save you. There is a savior element of here. And if we can remember that because it's a complicated archetype, the child, in and of itself, it is not complicated. We complicate it. We complicate our own relationship to our own child, but there is to go back, that there is that idea of that redemptive element, but it's always included. The child is always within us. That wall around it, we protect it. We don't bound it in and not let it out, but we do care for it. We have to caretake that part of ourselves. Just have some wild fun.
Teletubbies.
I totally think of Sesame Street and the Teletubbies. And, just to kind of go into the child archetype, because it's, I think it's the number one article on my website, or the ones that I've written about the child. I think, as adults, we're all trying to grapple with the child archetype, and there is, oh my God, such a part of psychology, I think, starting in the 70s. It's all about your childhood, and it's all about what happened. It's like you'll never escape your childhood. If you were effed up in your childhood, that's it. And then there is kind of moves,
yeah, and
James Hillman as well.
Yeah, I think, and to mention James Hillman, I think very much we need to clarify that it's not so much about digging up histories of what happened in childhood that you can never change, but what is the living child in you right now? How can that be invoked, and how can that be directly engaged and nurtured, instead of just going back into the past and digging that all up, though there may be some use in that in certain therapies. What is going on right now, and how can we come out and play?
Yeah, and see that as being a very valuable active relationship of relating to that child part of us. And there's so many specific flavors, that at least in my practice I'll work with people. And so the child is this very big archetype that we all have. It can be almost hard to kind of claim if it's just generic, if it's innocent and fun and trusting and all of that. That's great. Some people have a very difficult time owning that or seeing that part of themselves. So there's what I call kind of like the flavors of the child archetype, like the magical child, the innocent child, the orphan child, the wounded child. There's quite a few. Divine child. And they all kind of have, I mean, they're all child, but they do have specific kind of flavors and their own sort of possibilities and pathologies with them as well. And I think that's an article on my website with a little bit more information about what those look like that, you might identify probably with one more than the others.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thing to look into. I'd say also, it seems simple, but also hanging out with literal children is a wonderful way
as you do working with kids.
Yeah, and I'd say working in a school has been such a blessing. I just love it, and it keeps me so alive and in the moment, and kids are awesome. They're really, really lots of fun.
So people are listening and they're like, okay, what do I do with this information? How do I keep an eye on this or whatever in my life? There's a couple of practical things that come up for me, other than be open to play, be open to this wholehearted, fun energy. And I think if the more you think this is ridiculous or you don't have access to it or you're feeling bad, like, oh, I can't get to it, I'd love to have some fun. I think the first stage is just to be open to it. And that's not hunting for it, but just literally and either an affirmation or something that you do to be open to it. To be like, I'm open to play. The other thing is just, like the silly thing, like you were doing it on the bus. I was not doing it at the bus. We're city kids. But like mundane things like that, being open to it, walking along the sidewalk, seeing where there's a hopscotch thing. Do it.
Yeah. Go for it.
Throwing, paper into the waste paper basket, any keep an eye out for that. And I think something very practical, you can anchor good joyful moments in your brain. You are rewiring your neurological pathways. And
it's the greatest Prozac ever to just
play. Absolutely.
Be in that and trying things that you're not good at or that you're not experienced in. It gives you that sense of like, oh, I'm starting over. I'm like a total child when I start to draw. All of a sudden it's like it froze way back when I was in middle school, and now I'm picking it back up again. And it does bring up that sort of vulnerable innocence that comes with starting something new, and you just have to be imperfect with it and play around with it, mess around with it.
Yeah. Well, what I think we haven't said specifically, but what is the big part of this card and the archetype is ego. The child hasn't developed an ego yet. We teach children to have an ego because that's what you've got to care about what other people think. You've got to care about this and that development's happened. But there's so much a part of this card. Whereas if you're like, oh, I used to play piano or I used to draw, that's your ego saying you can't go do it. But it's this child part that's like, yes, 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 let's do it. And what the child brings is the joy of just doing it. And it's that conversation that the ego comes in and says, no, you'll be embarrassed or you'll be whatever to do it. So
you know what I think happens when the child's repressed? I think one of the things that might happen is that we eat too much sugar. You think you're like, the child is not happy, and the child's like, candy bar now. And then the child's gonna force its way in there no matter what.
It's true.
But maybe if we're, I've found that if I'm happier in my body and I've had a more joyful full body day, I won't crave these things as much. I wonder if that's like the child going, I need a candy bar, I need a lollipop,
I think you make a really, really good point, and again, it's kind of like that being our inner parents, right? If you're giving yourself the unconditional love of the mother, father, and the boundaries and the structure, you're going to be happy. You're not going to want to indulge, or overindulge in something, like sugar or whatever. You're not going to have that out of control child part of you. Make me happy. And, that brings us to the shadow of the child. The temper tantrums, the it's never enough. And just if you worked with children, and I have, a lot of my friends have kids, I was a kid myself, that inconsolable craziness that kids get into. They're just like, they just can't deal. They're not happy and they can't express kind of how they are. We as adults, I think we have to see that part of us.
Yes.
Although it might be tamped down. We might just, have gone into a big meeting at work or whatever.
Well, we need to find the difference between childlike and childish. There's a difference there.
And my personal theory is I don't think locking that part up and, putting it, nose to the corner, you've been bad, works all that well in the long term. It might have been the way we were treated as kids. That might have been how we were raised. But I think if you are consciously working with that part of yourself, and recognition, mindfulness is the first step. But in working with people, I ask them to understand what was their ultimate mother, father, not their own necessarily, because no one's perfect, but that archetypal unconditional loving mother and that unconditionally loving father, with the structure and the difference between the get up and go out and the mother come here. If you do that for yourself, you will be able to deal with that child in a way that's really going to help you. You are providing that for yourself, that self-acceptance and self-compassion that are inherent with that lightest side of the parental archetypes can be helpful. So, we didn't even talk about movies. Oh my gosh, this is a big card.
I know. I'm realizing it's so much fun, and there's so many layers, and there's just so many ways to go with it.
Well, and it's an archetype everybody has too.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not so foreign, is it?
It's true. And so we'll just kind of wrap this up a little bit. Maybe talk about more of the films and things that we see are related to both the son and the child archetype. And you'd mentioned earlier Robin Williams. He is a very, very strong, I would say, Puer, which is the eternal child or the Peter Pan child. And he will embody that, I think, in pretty much every film. At least in little slices. So, as well as a comedian, I mean, he's got a lot more going on, but he really brings that, I think, to all the roles. In terms of this, there's so many great child archetypes, and ones that really represents the son. And another actress is Shirley Temple, my childhood hero.
When I grow up in a year or 2 or 3, I'll be happy as can be.
She just really, I mean, if you picture the sun, that could be Shirley Temple sitting on that horse. Just
totally
pure, the curls, the innocence, the just joy and happiness, and that unsinkable purity and joy. And it was really, for the times, those movies were made World War II, 30s, 40s, and into the 50s, that she really modeled that. I mean, a lot of people go like, oh, it's saccharine, it's blah, 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 and it's the pure child archetype. And all of the flavors of the child archetype are there. Certainly divine child, orphan child, magical child. So if that's your cup of tea, or you think you could stand that much cute, they are blonde,
if you could stand our
curly
podcast, which is also, I mean, we were both Shirley Temples.
Oh, we were both of the curly-haired kids. They're on. Well, the Shirley Temple movies are on Amazon, and most of them are all included in the Prime membership. But anyway, I have a long list that will be in the show notes for great films that really kind of embody this as an adult character, bringing this energy of the child. There's a film called Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium, and kind of a sleeper film. It's Natalie Portman and Dustin Hoffman. I've probably mentioned it on here before. He's kind of a fairy godfather, but what's also really happening is it's an adult, he's the magical child. He's really inviting Natalie Portman, who is the starving artist, that blocked artist. So we have a relationship of the moon. What she's going through, she's a composer and a piano player. She's blocked. And literally in the movie, there is a wooden block that she's there to work with. So I really, if you're an artist, or you're really intrigued by both the moon and the sun archetypes, I recommend that film. It's only 6-7 years old, starring Dustin Hoffman, Natalie Portman. I'll probably put a link to it in the show notes. And then there's other films that I think
I recently saw, again with the kids, we had I had a flower fairy camp I did with the school that I work at, and we had all these films kind of around that theme of spring and growing and things like that. And we watched The Secret Garden.
Yeah, which I mentioned that too.
Yeah, which has a lot of the different child archetypes in the various characters, and but also demonstrates that importance of the walled garden that's secret and special and beautiful and a safe place to grow and try something vulnerable. which is like what the young character does, the cousin who's
He's
very
like,
sick.
he's lame.
Yes, and he's just never been outside, he's never been in his body in a positive way before, and he comes out and gets fresh air and essentially learns to walk in the secret garden. So beautiful film.
Yeah, that's another one
also
that
explores the orphan, and all of those things.
Yeah, there's an inherent caretaking, I think, that children have. They in their innocence, they will take care of each other, and they're you can value fun, and you'll see a list on the website too of sort of the opposites of like what happens when you don't have a childhood, when you're raised stripped of that, or maybe you have it until you're 3, and there's this big leaps of consciousness every year that you grow. And by the time you're 6, you're starting to really develop an ego and all of that. And, there's films like La Femme Nikita. We were talking about the film Hannah, where, there are girls who are raised to be assassins. So they're basically raised without the child archetype being honored or valued.
Yeah, this opposite of the Shirley Temple. We also Kick-Ass. We've got the little girl who's the most lethal of the lot.
Exactly, and they're fun to watch. And
it's a comedic contrast to see the child doing what an adult man would do, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot there.
Oh yeah, and we can't leave this episode without mentioning Big. With
Tom
of
course
Hanks,
not. That's true.
Which explores not only what it means to be a kid, but also it's so funny how that character begins to lose, just like all of us do, when we get obsessed with career or whatever, loses that connection to his own childhood. He's like on the phone, he's like, I can't talk to you right now, and there's this big dramatic scene, and he has to refine it by becoming a kid again, literally in that movie, of course. It also makes me think of Robin Williams once again in Hook. He's the Peter Pan who's grown up and lost connection to that magical child and so forth. So I think those are both great movies about what it means to be a kid and losing it and regaining it and all of that.
Absolutely, and it's something that another part of the child is our relationship to responsibility. Because you're a kid, I want to do it myself, and then other times you're like, no, do it for me. So when we don't lose that is always with us. That's sort of like, I want responsibility. No, I don't want responsibility. Yeah. And it's like that part, and how do we treat that part of us, and how do we understand it? Are we just gonna reject it and think, oh, that's silly and that's stupid, go away? But just to work with it on a different level, I think can be really, really helpful for people, instead of, I'm a grown up, it's got to be like this. And I was like, well, once you do that, you're closing the door to joy. You can't have it both ways. You can't just live this ordered, structured, sort of self-punishing life and have joy. You're gonna, when you've got that part of you that's a pain in the what, that doesn't want to work, or that doesn't want responsibility, and you shut the door on that, you're shutting the door on the joyful parts of it too.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good sort of takeaway, I think, for most of us, to go, right, I have to work with that pain in the ass part of me too. Okay. But there's fun and there's joy there too, and I think that's what this card is and the stage is bringing.
Wonderful.
Teletubbies, la la. So this is we only have a few more left. Sigh, I know.
Yay.
But if people have ideas or suggestions or questions, we always love hearing from you. Please email us at atpodcast@archetypist.com, and soon hopefully we will have a website or a page for people to come and give us their contact information so we can stay in touch, and then we'll be putting out announcements about what the next plans are for later on in the year. But we only have, two more to go?
Yeah, 2 more to go. So next stage, the Judgment card. Don't be afraid. It's a fortuitous card as we near.
That card, yeah.
Yeah.
So people rising up from graves and stuff.
I know it looks really scary, but we'll break it down, demystify.
We'll protect the Teletubbies. Up on that scene.
No Teletubbies were harmed in the making of this podcast
at all. All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. Catch us next time.
Ciao.
We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we invite you to become a part of the Archetypal Tarot team by becoming one of our patrons. Our patrons are awesome. So if you're interested, visit tiny tiny.cc/tarot for more information and the awesome rewards for joining. That's tiny.cc/tarot. Thanks for listening to the Archetypal Tarot Podcast. Show notes for this episode can be found by going to archetypist.com/sun. And we only have a few episodes left, so if you'd like to stay in touch with us, just send us an email to atpodcast@archetypist.com. That's ARCHETYPIST.com. Thanks so much.